Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I give you a very warm welcome to the 2021 Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. And what a battle it has been for us all to get there over the last 2 years. I'd like to thank the skippers and the crews for all your perseverance to make this happen. Fortunately, on the Blue Water racetrack, we learn a lot about innovation and modifying our plans and adapting to different circumstances. And I know you've had to do a lot of this to be able to get to this stage where we've got our race on at Boxing Day. First up today, I'd like to introduce Gabrielle Woodhouse from the Bureau of Meteorology for an update on our weather forecast. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thanks, Noel. Just bear with me while I share my screen. So hopefully you can all see the slides at the moment, and what we'll be going through today is a briefing for basically what we're expecting in terms of forecast conditions over the water. But before we get to that, we're going to look at what we actually forecast, what the different words mean, and where you can find information so that you can actually figure out what you want to do on the water. So just a little reminder that before you head out, that there's a few things that you do want to check before you head off. So first one being looking at marine wind warnings, the prospect of different weather, particularly thunderstorms or showers coming through, what kind of wind conditions and wave conditions you're going to see, as well as the tide times. So looking at wind in particular, when we're forecasting the wind, we forecast both the strength and the direction of the wind. So as you know, wind will vary from moment to moment. So what we're looking at is basically what happens over an average of about 10 minutes. This is just to even out those little tiny changes in the wind. And one thing to note is that the wind is measured at a height of 10 meters above the sea or the ground. So as you know, down towards your ankles versus what you feel up around your shoulders can be quite different in terms of that wind. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of the wind direction, we will forecast the direction from about 8 different compass points, as you'd expect. And one thing to note with the winds is that we'll often see some wind gusts, and they'll vary quite a lot. And sometimes they can be up to about 40% stronger than the 10-minute average at times. Likewise, we can occasionally see squalls that come through. Squalls are going to come through with, say, like a nice southerly change or thunderstorms. And these have a really abrupt increase in wind speed. That lasts for a couple of minutes before dying off quite quickly. And in these sorts of conditions, you can have wind gusts that are quite strong, so up around the 40 to 50 knot mark. With winds, there are a number of wind warnings that are produced. Strong wind warnings are when we're looking at an average wind speed of at least 26 knots, getting up to 33 knots. After that, we look at gale force winds, so that's between 34 knots to 47 knots. Storm force winds are stronger still, and these aren't to be confused with thunderstorms. I know that they sound very similar, but they're very different in nature. So storm force winds, generally looking at an average 10-minute mean wind of 48 to 63 knots. And hurricane force is stronger still, and we're looking at above 64 knots. Obviously, with these sorts of winds, the gusts that we'll see are going to be much stronger, as you can see in that table. And we're also going to see some waves starting to build up in terms of their height. On the water, in terms of some of the weather conditions that can really affect what you see out on the water, are going to be thunderstorms, particularly as they can be very short-lived and generate quite quickly. And with thunderstorms, you've got all sorts of risks varying from really strong and gusty winds from all sorts of different directions, hail, maybe even some water spouts. There's a lot that can happen with thunderstorms. In terms of some of the bigger weather systems that will give you very different conditions on the water, we're looking at lows, particularly East Coast lows, when we'll have at least gale force winds and very large waves. Likewise, cold fronts and troughs, as they move along the coast, they can also generate very changeable weather conditions. Sometimes we will also see some sea fog. I believe we saw some earlier this week down along the southern portion of the coast. So that is another one to be wary of, just because you can have quite low visibility. Sometimes with some of these sorts of weather systems, particularly when we're looking at lows and East Coast lows, there can be severe weather warnings that are predominantly for the land, but they can include some of the risks along the coastal strip. And these can include abnormally high tides, damaging or destructive surf, as well as heavy rain and damaging winds, which obviously, if you're not a big fan of very strong winds, it's something to be wary of. In addition, for New South Wales, there are hazardous surf warnings that can be issued when we're looking at particularly powerful or deceptively powerful waves coming through. Looking closely at the waves, there's a few different ways that we provide some information on this, and it's due to just how those waves are being generated. So when we're looking at sea-generated seas, they're basically the waves that have been generated from the local winds. So they're quite choppy and changeable. They have a really short period and they're not very well organised. Swell, however, is obviously generated from rather distant weather systems, and this means that the waves have been able to combine and form, much more organised waves effectively, and these typically have a much longer period. Combining both the sea waves and the swell will generate the significant or combined wave height. Now, this is a difficult one to sort of explain because you can have all sorts of small and very different waves, and just how they combine will give you a different look in terms of what you see out on the water. So more frequently, you'll see waves that will be less than what the significant wave height is forecast as, but what the significant wave height is it's an average of the highest third of waves, which sounds a little bit difficult to sort of get your head around, but it's saying that more often than not, those waves are going to be a little bit less than that height. But likewise, just with how those waves combine, you can end up seeing some maximum wave heights that could be up to twice the height. So something to really take note of as you look at the forecast. Just a little reminder before you head out that there's, you want to be on top of all the different things weather-wise across the water. So it includes your marine wind warnings, what kind of weather is expected, wind and wave, as well as the tide times. Now, where to find some of this information? So there's a few ways to be able to access information for the marine forecast and warning. So first offly, there's the Inmarsat satellite data, and this includes information for the high seas and Bass Strait forecasts. Likewise, there's the radio forecasts that are read out every 4 hours along the coast. And when there are strong wind warnings in place, these are broadcast every hour on the hour. In addition to that, because data can be a little bit tricky over the water, there is a Marine Light website page that is for low bandwidth. It doesn't have much in the way of graphics and is mostly text. And this is just to help decrease the amount of data that you might be needing to use out on the water. So what kind of forecasts are available? So within 60 nautical miles of the coastline, we have the coastal waters forecast. This also includes the local waters forecast, and these are for the smaller bays and harbours and some of the inland waters as well. Now, these forecasts are issued twice per day, and they look at the next 4 days. In terms of how regularly they're updated, when there are strong wind warnings in place, these forecasts are updated every 6 hours, and they can be updated as required if conditions change, whether it's we're looking at the likelihood of strong winds being introduced, or likewise if they have decreased below threshold and we're expecting it to be a cancellation. Looking more closely at the coastal waters forecast between Sydney and Hobart, there are quite a few, and each of these do have slightly different information for just the exact timing of a wind change moving through, as you'd expect, just because of the location involved. In terms of what's on these sorts of forecasts, it has starts off with a weather situation, and this is basically to describe the synoptic features that are going to be driving what you're expecting over the ocean, whether it's going to be a trough that's going to be moving through, is it a low that's developing, is there a ridge of high pressure, this sort of information. In terms of the exact details in the forecast for each of the days, it's split up into a few different sections. So first, winds, and this will describe what winds in terms of strength and direction we're expecting and any wind changes. The seas, like I was explaining before, will give you an indication of what kind of wave heights you're expecting to be driven by those winds. And swell is the swell that's been generated from some distant systems. There's also a section for weather where we'll be highlighting the potential for showers or thunderstorms or fog or hazy conditions, anything that could be affecting you on the water. For New South Wales, there can occasionally be a caution statement for when there is in New South Wales hazardous surf warning as well, just to take note of that. In terms of the coastal waters warning products, these are sort of separated out a little bit. And so it's more going, is there a strong wind warning or is there a gale force wind warning over the different coastal waters districts? And so the details for those warnings are contained within the forecast. But as you can see here, it'll label the districts that are affected by the strong wind warnings or gale force warnings, whatever it may happen to be. Away from, or further offshore than 60 nautical miles, we get into the high seas forecast. Now these are slightly different, but effectively quite similar in nature. So across Australia, the high seas forecasts are split up into a number of different sections and regions. So for us, we're looking at the southeastern zone, and these are issued twice per day, and they look at the forecast for the next 24 hours. Similar to the coastal waters forecast, warnings are updated every 6 hours in this product. Now, they may not look as pretty, but over the open ocean, text products are a little bit more friendly. It follows the same pattern in terms of the first part. It will describe, are there any warnings current? What is the situation? So that'll be what kind of synoptic features are where and where they'll be traveling to during that forecast period. The third part of the forecast is actually the details about what kind of winds and seas and swell we're looking at, as well as what kind of weather you'll be expecting around those features. Likewise, there is a separate wind warning for the high seas forecast, and these follow a similar pattern, except that it will include some information about the situation for where different features are going to be. So here it'll say what kind of warning is it. In this particular case, it's a gale warning for the western, southern and southeastern areas. It'll give you a situation. It'll give you the area affected for that particular warning. And then underneath that, it'll give the forecast conditions within that area. If you're looking for something a little bit more graphical, METI is updated at least twice per day, sometimes even more frequently. And this is extracted directly from our forecast policy database. And in here, what we're looking at is the coastal waters forecasts. And so what you can see in this image is that the data goes to about 60 nautical miles offshore and aligns with those coastal waters forecasts. In this, on METI, sorry, you can look at winds, waves, weather, temperature. There's a lot that you can look at depending on what you're interested in. So looking ahead now at the race and the weather itself, what we're looking at for Sunday and into Monday is a cold front that's just going to sweep across the southern part of the Tasman Sea, and that's going to bring a trough along the New South Wales coast. And what we can see here on Sunday morning is that that trough's going to sit somewhere near Sydney, and then it's going to move fractionally further north and then sort of weaken off during Sunday night. And across the southern portion of like south of the Bight and across towards Tasmania, we have a high pressure system that's extending a ridge in the wake of that trough. Across the northern parts of Australia, though, we are expecting some deepening of a monsoon trough across the top end. Now, a little change to that pattern is going to mean that that ridge is going to be the dominant feature throughout the race. So if we have a look now at Tuesday, what we can see is that ridge extending across Tasmania is the main feature, and likewise maintaining that low pressure trough and potentially a low up over the top end of Australia. There is a little bit of uncertainty about exactly the placement of that high pressure system. So what I've got up on screen at the moment is just a little model comparison of where we're looking at by Tuesday night for where that high is going to be sitting and just how that ridge is going to develop across Tasmania and potentially along the New South Wales coast there. So there is a little bit of variation in that ridge position, and that's going to determine what kind of winds we see on Tuesday. And likewise, it's a very similar story on Wednesday, but we can see that that low over the northern parts of Australia has tracked a little bit further east, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about exactly where that system is going to be going and how that'll affect conditions on the return home. So looking more closely on Sunday morning, what we'll see in the early hours is that trough starting to approach Sydney, and we're expecting it to come through sometime between 8 and 11. By about 11 a.m, we're expecting the change to be up around the Central Coast and across Sydney waters, looking at about 10 to 15 knots initially, and that's going to increase to about 15 to 20 knots come race start. And what we are going to expect as that change arrives in Sydney is the potential for a couple of showers, generally some cloudy conditions, maybe a little bit of haziness as it does so. And there's also the risk that we could see some thunderstorms. At this point, the thunderstorm activity is going to be quite isolated, and we could only see it very early in the morning or during the afternoon offshore. So like in the morning, it'll be over the land, that is, and that later in the afternoon, the risk is for thunderstorm activity is going to be over the open ocean and well offshore. There's also the risk that we could see some strong winds developing as that change moves a little bit further north. So at race start, it's most likely that we'll see winds around 15 to 20 knots. And once you start to round the heads, it's possible that they could get up to about 25 knots. It's later in the afternoon that we could see those winds increase further and see the potential for some strong wind warnings. So as we get into the later part of Sunday afternoon and evening, what we can see is basically southeasterly winds 15 to 25 knots along the New South Wales coast. And like I said, there is the risk that we could see some areas just getting up towards 30 knots as well. So this means that we're going to have mostly sea-driven waves, and we'll have a pretty low southerly swell at this point in time. We are still expecting very cloudy conditions and maybe the chance of a light shower or two. And it's a little bit hit and miss at the moment as to if we'll see some hazy or low visibility conditions as well. Now, as we get into Sunday night, we start to see those wind strengths taper off and those wave heights remain fairly steady. Again, it's still going to be mostly cloudy conditions, and we could still see the chance of a light shower or so. For the southern portion of the New South Wales coast, we could end up seeing winds turn a little bit more westerly inshore and quite light as we see a land breeze develop on Sunday night and early Monday morning. Now, during the day on Monday, we'll see that change move obviously towards New Zealand, and behind that we'll start to see winds turning more southeasterly. Now, as the ridge starts to develop, we could see a bit more of an abrupt change in the southeasterly winds across the southern part of the New South Wales coast and across the Bass Strait. At this point in time, we're looking at south to southeasterly winds of 15 to 25 knots for New South Wales, and through the Bass Strait, turning a little bit more east to southeasterly, and perhaps a little bit lighter, 15 to 20 knots. Down towards Tasmania, again, still looking at southeasterly winds becoming south-southwesterly to the south of Tasman Island, and just the chance of a shower more so up around the New South Wales coast at this point. Getting into Monday afternoon and evening, we start to see those southeasterly winds persisting along the New South Wales coast and along the Bass Strait, although the winds do start to turn a little bit more easterly later in the evening. For Tasmania, for the northern parts at least, looking at south-southeasterly winds, 15 to 20 knots, there's a risk we could get up towards 25 knots in the sort of northeast corner in the upper east there. But further south along Tasmania, we're looking at southwesterly winds getting up to around 15 knots through Storm Bay and tending a little bit more south-southeasterly along the Derwent River. Now, as you cross to the south of Tasman Island, that's where we're going to start to interact with a reasonable southwesterly swell. So at this point in time, looks as though it'll be somewhere around 2 to 3 meters in height. And that's going to be a feature that will persist throughout the coming days in that little area of the world. So on Monday night, we start to see those winds taper off as that ridge of high pressure starts to develop. And so that means that we're looking at a little bit more in the way of light and variable winds across Tasmania, and particularly along the Derwent River. Overnight, we're expecting a really light northwesterly wind to develop. And likewise, still looking at that southwesterly swell to the south of Tasman Island. More so if you're traveling a little bit further offshore, but if you turn in nice and tightly, you might avoid some of that coming through. On Tuesday, it's a very similar story. We start to sort of see a little bit more variation in the winds across the Bass Strait and the northern parts of Tasmania. So initially, we're looking at west to southwesterly winds along the Tasmanian coast. Inshore, it would be more likely that we could see just a little light westerly, but a little bit further offshore, and that would become a bit more southwesterly. At this point, looking around 10 knots, but they'll start to increase a little bit further offshore and also across the southern portion of the Tasmanian coast. By Tuesday evening, we start to see those southeasterly winds along the New South Wales coast easing, and along the Bass Strait, variation depending on where you are, is to northeast to southeasterly winds of about 10 knots, potentially getting up a little bit more towards the Victorian coastline. Tasmania, though, still going to see those southwesterly winds to the south of Tasman Island, and generally southeasterly winds for the northern part of the Tasmanian coast. As we get to Wednesday and Thursday, what we start to see is a high pressure system moving into the Tasman Sea, and so that's going to lead to a little bit more variation in winds, particularly for the direction. So along the New South Wales coast, somewhere between southeast to northeasterly winds. Through the Bass Strait, generally east to northeasterly, and by the evening they'll tend a little bit more northeasterly. For Tasmania, though, we're expecting northeast to northwesterly winds, about 10 to 15 knots along the northern part of the coastline there. And in the south there, generally southeast to southwesterly winds. I'm expecting southeasterlies to develop along the Derwent River during the day. By Wednesday evening, it's a very similar story, although we start to see that increase in the northeasterly winds across the Bass Strait. And this story will be a feature going into Thursday and Friday. Now here I've just got a little comparison for what we could see on the map on Thursday, and it's really going to depend on how the low pressure system over the northern parts of Australia evolves and the path it decides to take. So here you can see that there's a range of solutions. They're all sort of pointing to that low pressure system moving towards the Queensland coast and that high pressure system over the southern part of the Tasman Sea. So at this point, it looks as though it'll be more likely that we'll see northeasterly winds along the New South Wales and down towards Tasmanian coasts, generally somewhere between about 10 to 20 knots, but they could increase during the day, and we could end up seeing some strong wind warnings as well. With those winds starting to pick up, we will also see a northeasterly swell start to develop later Thursday or during Friday. Now here on Friday, this is where we start to get into very much crystal ball territory, and we have that low pressure system in a variety of places. I want to draw your attention to the top left corner for one of the models, the Australian model there, which has that low moving a little bit further south through northeast New South Wales. And if we see that sort of a situation, then we can see much stronger winds and generally a little bit more easterly in direction. For the remainder of the current sort of forecast out on Friday, it seems more likely that we'll have north to northeasterly winds during the day on Friday and potential for some strong wind warnings as well. But like I said, there is significant forecast uncertainty this far out, particularly with a system as volatile as a low moving across northern Australia. Once we get to the following Saturday, again, you can see we are very much in incredibly uncertain territory. Depending on how that low tracks, we could end up seeing quite strong northeasterly winds, or we could see light and variable winds. It's a little bit far out at this point in time to say. In saying that, the most likely scenario at this point is somewhere between northeast to southeasterly winds, and maybe end up seeing some strong wind warnings as well. If we do see that, then it's more likely that we're going to have a little bit more choppy wave and potentially seeing a few showers. Depending on when you make it into Hobart, we are looking at rather mild conditions. It's going to be quite nice in my view. So generally dry conditions for most of the race once we get south of New South Wales. In Hobart though, maximum temperatures around that 19 to 21 degree mark and overnight minimums around 9 to 11 degrees. Not much in the way of showers on the cards at all for Hobart, which I think is absolutely glorious. And just before we sort of finish up some of this information, looking at the sea surface temperatures and currents, the East Australia current at the moment is quite strong and quite close to the coast between Sydney and Jervis Bay. But just to the south of there is another little current that might give you a little weak northerly inshore between Jervis Bay and Bermagui. There is still a eddy that's offshore from Gable Island and another southeast of Hobart. So just looking at those currents there, this is effectively what we're looking at. So depending on how close it comes into the coast, you could be able to pick up a little bit of the southerly current between Jervis Bay and Sydney. Looking at the tides, the high tides at the moment are in the afternoon. So for Sydney, looking at the high tide being around 2 p.m. So it'll still be coming in as we're heading out from the heads. Further south, the high tide is obviously in the afternoon and in the early hours of the morning if you do need to retire. So just to summarise, currently we're looking at southerly winds at race start, maybe a few showers and potentially even a little bit of haze around. And there is a risk of a thunderstorm offshore during Sunday afternoon. And there is a risk we could also see some strong wind warnings during the day on Sunday across much of the New South Wales coast. What we'll see on Monday is southeast to easterly winds starting to develop across the southern portion of the New South Wales coast and the Bass Strait. And as we head towards Tasmania, we're looking at southwesterly winds and a southwesterly swell south of about the Tasman Island. And we'll start to see south to southeasterly winds through Storm Bay and up the Derwent River. With that warm current sitting just offshore from Sydney, it is quite warm, and that's going to help lead to the thunderstorm activity on Sunday, like what we saw earlier this morning. But one thing to note is that there is the northerly current just inshore to the south of Jervis Bay. There is the potential for strong wind warnings during Sunday, obviously, and from midweek, depending on the track and position of that low pressure system. So I might just stop there for a minute, and I have another question, which is where do competitors access comparison charts? So at the moment on the Bureau's website, you can easily access the Australian MSLP chart and rainfall charts and marine charts and stuff like that. In terms of some of the other models, there are a number of websites that you can access some of this data from. So for example, Windy has some of the European model information and as well as the US model. And so I'll ask if there's any questions, otherwise I shall stop sharing.
Well, thank you, Gabrielle. As there are no more questions at this stage, it looks like we've got a tricky race for navigators. I'll now hand over to Philip Gaydon from AMSA. Philip, can we hand to you now, please?
If you're in the unfortunate position of having to turn on and attach it to a person, life raft, or the vessel itself if it isn't sinking. If you've abandoned and are in a life raft and it is rough, keep the EPIRB inside the raft with you, but try and keep the aerial as vertical as possible. That allows it to be received in the best possible way by the satellites. Make sure you know whether your beacon has a manual activated switch or whether it's a water switch. And please take care of the water activated beacons. We do get a few that activate in heavy weather or sea spray, so try and keep it in a sheltered spot whilst easily accessible should you need it. If you have to use a personal locator beacon, you must try and attach it to the upper portion of your body above the water as best possible. If the aerial is underwater, we really don't get the signal out, and it's very, very difficult for the aircraft to actually find your location. You need to keep the aerial as vertical as possible, and again, make sure it is attached to you with a lanyard. Be very careful with some of those personal locator beacons because they do sink unless they're in their protective housing. If you happen to turn on your EPIRB or PLB, obviously you'll have a few other things on your mind. However, your beacon will emit an audible tone, or a strobe light will flash, or an LED light will flash to show you that it's activated. Once it's turned on, you can consider it a given that we will receive it in Canberra and we'll commence our SAR response. Our first checks will be to talk to race control and the state water police to determine whether it's a false alarm or whether you're actually really in distress. We will liaise with the water police and determine who's best placed to coordinate a rescue response for you. If your alert is accidental and you come down and you see your light flashing, please let us know immediately, either directly or through race control. Previously, we have diverted and tasked assets to yachts in your race with beacons that they are unaware is active. And the problem with that is that those assets then aren't available for other search and rescue incidents should they be required. So it's really important that if you do have it accidentally activated, you let us know straight away. And the best way, or if you're unaware of it, make sure we can contact you at all times by having your satellite phones on and charged and with an antenna that's got a view of the sky, or monitoring your radio networks. If you see any of these aircraft flying around, please turn on channel 16 and listen for any instructions, listen for any radio calls. They may be trying to divert you to assist another vessel. They may be trying to contact you directly for an accidental beacon. If you do have to do a helicopter transfer or a winch, please make sure you turn on channel 16 and turn the volume up. Follow the instructions from the pilot, who will tell you whether they want you to, which course they'd like you to steer if possible. Make sure you stow all loose equipment and remove or frap or secure all sails. Be prepared for extremely strong winds, noise and spray. It's very confusing when you're underneath the rotor wash. If possible, they'll ask you to start your engine and steer into the weather. If the engine is inoperable, consider streaming your sea anchor or drogue from the bow. They'll hold your bow into the weather. It allows the pilot to get a good visual reference when they're trying to conduct a winch. Turn your radar to standby and do not use HF comms while they're overhead, and please be ready to launch a life raft should it be required that it might be safer to winch you actually from a life raft. If you require medical assistance, please contact the race committee for initial advice and assessment. If it's serious, they will either contact us or you can contact us directly or call 000. If the patient requires evacuation, we can help arrange that, and we can also look at dropping you medical supplies if that's what you need. For your return voyage, and I know it's after the race and after Hobart, please make sure your EPIRB and boat contact details are up to date. I understand many of you have different crews change, and it's very important for us to know that the PLBs that were in the race are no longer in the race, or if they're being used by other people or other boats. We do get, and this is the last observations the last few years, more incidents with you returning home than we do in the race. So please make sure you look after each other, look after yourselves, and have a safe trip. Good luck, and hopefully we'll see you on the other side.
Well, thank you, Philip. I noticed that we only had one question, and that's been answered over the screen. I'd like to now move on to welcome Drew Jones from Transport for New South Wales Maritime. Over to you, please, Drew.
Thanks, Noel. I'll just share my screen here. Oh, what's going on there? Sorry. Good morning. Okay, so I'll only be very brief. Just a few things about the start exclusion zone and the just the procedures on the day. So the exclusion zone is the same as previous years, same lines of buoys on the east and west. Still got 4 start lines in the middle, the 2 turning marks, and sorry, shared. Okay, sorry. Share screen. Sorry, folks. Right, sorry about that. Here we go. Yeah, so the exclusion zone is basically the same, as I said, as previous years. Same number of buoys around the outside, same areas. We have the same spectator areas. The 4 start lines again for this year, 2 turning marks, and the 3 sea buoys. A few points about it. The exclusion zone, there's going to be approximately 174 vessels inside the exclusion zone. So we've got the race yachts with the double handers on the 4th start line, of course. There's about 50 control vessels from maritime, marine rescue and police, plus the 30 odd media club and official spectator vessels. So it is going to be very busy inside the exclusion zone. So please keep your eyes and ears out and all your crews looking around to make sure there's not an incident inside. Once you do enter the zone, even before the exclusion zone is activated, please remain in the zone. Please don't go out through the buoys into the spectator areas. We can't vouch for the seamanship of the spectators on the outside, and they've all been restricted into a smaller area, so it is quite congested out there. So please only go out through the Tasman Sea when you do need to leave. And if you do need to come out of the exclusion zone back to the CYC, go out through the southern boundary where there's less likely to be less traffic. So a few key timings for the day. All of the control vessels will be on station by 11 a.m. At 11:30, we activate a 6-knot no-wash speed limit in the special event area, which covers Garden Island across to Bradley's Head and out to Line Zulu. At 12 o'clock, the exclusion zone is activated, so only authorised vessels and competitors are able to stay within the exclusion zone, and any sailors on the outside of the exclusion zone in the spectator areas must lower their sails. There's also areas where we have no passive craft and anchoring in close to the start area. Then, of course, 1 o'clock start area, and please, head north and turn right and go out to sea. Any questions at all? Have a great race, everyone.
Well, thank you, Drew. I noticed there's no questions on the screen. So we'll now move on to our race committee chair, Lee Goddard. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Commodore Noel. First, I'd just like to introduce myself. I've met many of you, but I've been appointed the race director and chair of the committee for this year, and it's a real privilege. Welcome to this, obviously being a compulsory briefing, and I remind you, we've got the final weather briefing at 8 a.m. on the 26th, which is also compulsory. So first comment, race on. I'm looking forward to it. It's been a lot of hard work and a lot of challenges this year, but the race is on. I'd like to acknowledge our Commodore, Noel Cornish, the CYCA, obviously the team, the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania, Rolex, Pure Meteorology, thanks Gabby, AMSA, thanks RMS, thanks Drew, the Water Police, Marine Rescue, the media, and most importantly, the competitors, you being the elite athletes. So I repeat that, race is on. It has been a challenging year for many with COVID, and we are very fortunate to be racing this year in the 76th with 94 entries. Our role, though, as the committee is to ensure a safe, a fair, and a fast race, and that's our intention for this year. We've got a broad range of backgrounds, and many of us, of course, have sailed in the race and sailed with and against many of you who are listening in now. We are risk aware, not risk adverse, and that's why we need to take you through the sailing instructions. And where there's interpretation, we'll be clear on that, but there are some very black and white regulations and rules and directions. As I said, our starting point is that while fair, these expectations and the race discipline will make sure the race is managed correctly, and that those who do participate do so within these very clear race directions, the sailing instructions, the notice of race, and of course the rules. I want to just initially go straight to the COVID protocols. I'm going to go through them now verbatim, and then I'm going to come back to them at the end. This is black and white. A couple of comments. It has been challenging, and we've had to make some changes over the last 2 or 3 weeks. We're all aware of that, as has Australia, as has society as a whole. As I said, we are very fortunate this race will go ahead. So we are conscious of any last minute activities by crews that may actually be challenging for us all. Don't do that. Work with the system, respect the authorities, not least the New South Wales government and Tasmanian government regulations, and work with us as we will work with you as well. So I said, I'll repeat these again at the end of my brief. COVID procedures for first of all race day. Only crew members and 3 shore crew are allowed on the CYCA marina until 10 a.m. You will need your crew passes to gain access. As such, please do say your goodbyes with family and friends as you are dropped off at the club. Ensure you have lodged your declarations that all crew have their negative PCR result and have completed the Tassie travel declarations. During the race, advise the race committee if any crew have COVID symptoms throughout the race and at the Tasman Island ETA call in, you must report if any crew have symptoms. Follow the usual COVID safe precautions. We are not making anything additional here. Follow the normal COVID safe precautions, and we do respect and thank you for your COVID plans, which has been part of the regulatory requirement for this race. The finish, and I ask you to note that this actually now is reflected in the Amendment 1 to the sailing instructions. The Tasmanian government has advised yesterday all crew, I repeat, all crew will need to do a rapid antigen test on the boat on arrival at the marina. Do not get off the boat. These tests will be provided to you when you berth at the marina by our volunteers. Each crew member will need to complete the test on the boat, and the owner is then required to complete a declaration that all crew members have returned a negative result. Repeat, do not get off the boat until that declaration is made and is confirmed. In the event that a crew member has a positive result, you are required to advise through the declaration who the crew member is, and that person will need to get a PCR test and isolate until a result is received. This means you potentially will need to get a hotel room with the appropriate place to actually do that isolation. I'll come back again to those COVID requirements because it's very important that we actually follow. That is black and white to ensure that we have a safe and effective race, and we respect the authorities who have actually allowed us to continue with the race for this year. Look, I want to thank all owners and participants for their cooperation and regulatory compliance. I know that has been challenging this year. I want to remind everyone of the discipline of the SCED. During the Blue Water point score, we actually did have to remind a few owners and skippers of that requirement, but it's very important that we actually maintain that discipline. We have contingency plans for the full range of emergencies. Of course, we assume the worst conditions, but as many of us have experienced, incidents often occur during the most benign of conditions. We've learned from the precedents, and we are adapting to these changing regulations. You all have a copy of the sailing instructions, hopefully in front of you, as described by the notice of the race. They are clear and there is clarity. I mind you, first of all, from a regulatory perspective, you must have the correct but minimum requirements for safety numbers on board at all times. Any crew change must be advised and acknowledged by the sailing office. If this does change those numbers, you need to consider the minimum safety requirements you need on board at any time. Please note the advice on potential hazards to navigation throughout the course. Reporting at the start, there's a large fleet, 94 entries, this our 76th year, in 4 clear promulgated starting lines. Please give room as you approach the committee vessel. Obviously on VHF 72, you'll be communicating, and please give due consideration while manoeuvring. The principal race officer, the PRO, will advise for each line clear or may individually recall. Of course, this will be advised by VHF. And a reminder to all, there is no general recall following the race start. If you do decide to discontinue racing and offload crew and then restart, you will still need that minimum crew to meet the safety requirements in accordance with the sailing instructions. On arriving, any declarations must be within 6 hours of finishing, and please ensure that you receive a receipt. It's really quite critical. Boats may be subject to spot checks up to 12 hours after their finish time, and you need to be prepared for that. Radio instructions. First of all, again, I'd like to acknowledge John Winning. I think this is the 16th time that JB Ware has been made available to us, this Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race team. JBW will be positioned halfway through the fleet, and Young Endeavour, as the alternate radio relay vessel, will be towards the back. JBW may call any yacht with a good radio signal at either end of the fleet at any time to relay positions or to relay information. SCEDs, and I'll keep coming back to these. The discipline of the SCED is absolutely critical to safe, fair, and correct race conduct. SCEDs, before you actually have a SCED, please charge your battery and tune prior. Also, 6156, the backup, is a simplex system, not on duplex. JBW will conduct a test broadcast 2 minutes prior to each SCED and check in with the Hobart Race Control and Young Endeavour. And JB Ware will also commence the SCED with a weather warning, so a weather update and any warnings, followed by the fleet positions reports at 0635 and at 1335 daily. So your positions should be accurately charted at 0630 and at 1330 daily in accordance with the instructions. If you have a problem with HF, and HF is primary, make every effort by VHF through another vessel or call JB Ware or Hobart Race Control or myself on my mobile or the sailing manager. Your tracker is to track you. The SCED confirms that you are okay. So just because you are tracked, it does not meet the requirements of the SCED. You must check in. So discipline of the scatter repeat again. JBW will be available for pre-race communication checks from 11:30 to 12:30 on the 26th on HF Primary 4483. You must at all times keep a proper listening watch on VHF channel 16 and report wind strengths and wave heights when the wind strength exceeds 40 knots in your vicinity. Satellite communication checks will be conducted daily at 13:35 from the 27th. A selection of boats in the fleet will be called at random, and you are required to answer. The Green Cape call ahead of Bass Strait at 37 degrees 15 south, that call is mandatory. You can call and receive acknowledgement from JBW, Hobart Race Control, or Young Endeavour. It is vital though, you must receive positive confirmation and clearance to proceed. This must occur. If you do decide to retire, please continue to participate in the SCEDS and advise us when you are safely back in port. Our team, based in Eden, if that's where you choose to go, will be out to assist you. Just remind you, the alert function of the boat's yellow brick tracking unit is a recognised means of raising alert to an emergency circumstance. Should that alert be received, the race committee will enable a SAR response in the same way as if an EPIRB alert was received. You will not need to touch the tracker unless you need to activate the beacon, which is actually the red button. So you do not need to touch it otherwise. As mentioned previously, we have medical professionals on call. Please ensure that you have fully considered your plans for dealing with and reporting medical emergencies. At the start of the race, the media will be close to the racing action, as you would expect, and this will be on a non-interference basis, but there may be movement between some boats. Man overboard. It's trite for me to say, but have a good plan in place. Obviously, it relies on good VHF, early communication externally, early broadcasting, prudent deployment of life-saving devices, dealing with your circumstances at the time, and actually making sure you're communicating so that all those in vicinity can assist and help. Please check your own personal flotation devices. The number of times that people have not done that and discovered perhaps a fault that could have been rectified simply by checking. We heard from AMSA before about inadvertent triggering of EPIRBs and PLBs. This can be very distracting and will use assets and time and energy where it should be used elsewhere. So please be aware of that. And if you are contacted, it's critical that we actually address it straight away. Sea life, for those who've been out just recently, you'll know there's a lot of whales, a lot of dolphins, and a lot of sunfish. You know, good look out, of course, at all times. That said, it is difficult, and please report sea life into JBWare and also into the race committee. Note this stunning instruction on drones. Obviously, it's new, but please comply in all respects. Maintain a good lookout by all means, by sight, by hearing, and any other means throughout the whole race, please. And I remind you, HF is primary. HF is primary for communications. Just want to give some general notes. This is before I come back to COVID. Obviously, there's a few outstanding things that we must ensure are completed as soon as practical. First of all, there's a number of spot checks which need to be completed. And I'll call out the yachts. And there's just probably about 30 yachts names I need to call out. So please listen in, and we can repeat again if required. For spot checks, Nautical Cirque, She's the Culp, Wild Oats, Mayfair, Truth 6, Philosopher, Sidewinder, and Enchantrel. For boats and also paperwork, B52, Enchantrel, Eve, Flying Fish, Old School, SMB, Stephen Hare, and Willow. And nav bags to be picked up, B52, Aurora, Euphoria, Gunrunner, Nautical Circle, Choose the Culp, Scallywag, Sidewinder, Smuggler, Solera, BRM, Wax Lyrical, Bell's Billy, King Billy, Old School, and Local Hero. Please pick up those nav bags as soon as practical. So as I wrap up, thank you again to all who have actually contributed to ensuring that we've got to this point. As I said, race is on. So thank you to Tara, our sailing manager, and all the sailing team, and also to the racing committee, all volunteers, both here in Sydney and also in Hobart. And as said, our aim is to make this the safest, the fairest, and the fastest race possible. I know there's a number of questions that have just come through. So before I hand to Tracy, our in Hobart, our race line finish partner, I just remind you, please go in the Q&A, or if need be, just go straight to the sailing office. Yeah. Okay, so I've just got a couple of questions here. Just move for one moment. I'll just clarify the. Okay, just first question from Murray Stewart. Can the general public come to SOAC after 10 a.m? If you are double vaxxed, the public can be on the dock from 10 a.m. And remind you, you need to be fully vaccinated. Can you get off in Hobart? That's a question from Ian Edwards. Yes, you can get off in Hobart to the dock. And SI says 063 and 1835 for SCED. That's confirming SCED's at 0635 and 1835. Second? Yeah. No need, so okay. Was there offer now? Is there any other questions that online? As I said, we are available, and the sailing office online.
There's one more question.
Just another question from Stephen Thomas about the URL link for it. And the answer to that is it is in the sailing instructions. So good question, Gordon. So and if you do get a positive test, where do you go to isolate? Each boat and owner crew needs to have a contingency plan for where a member, whether it be one or more, would actually isolate in Hobart. And that is your requirement to consider that now. Good question from Peter regarding sat phone. Can we call you back when finished what we're doing? Yes, obviously a reasonable time to get back as soon as practical when you are finished what you are doing. So question from Michael Pritchard, link to COVID declaration does not seem to be working. We'll look at that right now and we will fix it.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. A lot of questions coming in. Please don't hesitate to ask questions of the sailing office as they come to mind after this briefing finishes. I'd now like to hand over to our long-term partner, finishing partner and friends at the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania and the immediate past Commodore, Tracy Matthews. Over to you. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Commodore. Good morning, everyone. And the Royal Yacht Club are pleased once again to be the finishing partner for the Rolex Sydney to Hobart Yacht Race. And we're really excited to be seeing everyone in the Derwent River again soon. Now, I do have some slides and the CYC are going to share those. A couple of things for noting as you get to the Hobart end of the race. Next slide. As per your sailing instructions, the finish line is off the Castray finish box in Battery Point. For those who have not been to Hobart before, this is what it looks like. Positioned between the white Empress Towers on the left and the cream CSIRO building on the right. The outer end of the line will be marked with the yellow buoy and will have a flashing light at night. There's also an inner distance mark that must be left to port. If you are finishing at night, please illuminate your sail number on the port side so the finish box can confirm your identity. Once you're through the finish line, contact the finishing box as per the sailing instructions, drop sails, and stand by for the escort vessel. This will be one of the RICT or DSS patrol boats. If there are several yachts finishing together, please be patient. A patrol boat will get to you as soon as possible. Observe all directions from the skipper of the patrol boat, and please do not enter Kings Pier Marina until you're instructed to do so. Next slide. During the operating hours of the Taste of Summer Festival, you will enter the dock via a short detour past Princess Wharf, where you will receive a very enthusiastic welcome to Hobart from those enjoying the festival. Again, this year, yachts will be berthed on floating pontoons between piles and alongside the wharf in the Kings Pier Marina area and in Constitution Dock, taking account of your yacht length and draft and suitable berths available. As always, the berthing arrangements are like a giant Jenga puzzle. You've been allocated a berth and will be directed to this berth by the patrol boat. You must use your assigned berth. Don't forget, you must carry fenders for berthing, and these must be available on your arrival. Please don't put them in with your luggage. For those berthing in Constitution Dock, we have been given times that the bridge will open. This may require yachts going into Condock to be temporarily berthed on a staging pontoon. Please be patient as you will be advised when the bridge is to open. After hours, this may be the first thing the following morning. Any yacht to be berthed alongside a wharf will be issued with fender boards. However, you will require your own fenders. Please follow the instructions from the patrol boats. Masks must be worn once you have berthed, and you must be wearing a mask to disembark in the marina. As per usual, the liaison centre will be in the Rolex village, and our volunteers will be there to help you with any queries, questions and directions. Whether you are in Condock or Kings Pier, once you are safely berthed, you'll be welcomed by our liaison volunteers. Firstly, with the mandatory COVID rapid antigen test kits, and then in exchange for your tracker, the volunteers will deliver some well-earned refreshments and a quarantine bag. Next slide. It's a requirement of biosecurity TAS that every yacht disposes quarantine items appropriately. Please use the quarantine bag provided to dispose of all fish and fish products, meat and meat products, fruit and vegetables, eggs and seed. If you have any doubt, chuck it out. Yellow quarantine bins will be around the village, including in the waste compound. Next slide. There's been a change again this year to the collection point for your baggage. Baggage can be collected from the Executive Building underground car park at 4 Despard Street. This will be easy for everyone to find and a short walk from the Rolex village. It's in the street that runs behind Peter Johnson's Ship Chandlery and the Customs House Hotel. The entrance is the cream roller door, and there will be signage and phone numbers for assistance. The Glenorchy Rotary Club will be staffing the baggage area 24 hours daily after the first yacht finishes and up to 24 hours after the last yacht arrives. Please note they will be closed from 8 p.m. on New Year's Eve until 7 a.m. New Year's Day. And don't forget to collect your bags. Next slide. Please note the COVID safe plan in the sailing instructions and stay up to date with regulations and requirements in Tasmania over the next few days. Biosecurity is likely to be on site to check valid travel passes during your stay in the marina, so please make sure you've met all requirements for entry into Tasmania. Apart from the serious health consequences, there are significant fines and penalties for those not following requirements. If at any time you need to access a COVID-19 testing clinic, if any of your crew are feeling unwell or displaying symptoms, or if you need to have a test for your return home, the nearest COVID testing clinic to the village is very close by, behind 16A Evans Street in Macquarie Point. Check the latest opening hours and requirements online. Next slide. Some final points. All power cords used in the marina must be tagged and tested and must be run safely on the walkways. These will be checked. If you need to get a cord tested, please see the liaison centre and they'll be able to help you. The official prize giving will again be at the Federation Concert Hall at 3 p.m. on the 31st of December. and the marina must be vacated by 10 a.m. on the 3rd of January or have made some other arrangements with TasPorts. Last slide. I also encourage everyone to come down to Murrayville Esplanade in Sandy Bay to visit the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania. It's a short drive or leisurely walk from the waterfront, and it's also the location of the committee room, the radio room, and the protest room during the race. The club will be open normal hours, and it's a great place to come to enjoy a change of scenery with our bar, outdoor deck, and dining facilities, or to access services. Please call us at the club if there's anything we can help you with. Next slide. Finally, I wish you all a safe trip to Hobart and a happy Christmas. Have a great race, stay safe, and I'll see you when you get here. Cheers.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy. We're all looking forward to seeing you in Hobart and paying a visit around to the RYCT and enjoying the fellowship with you around there. There are a number of questions that probably Lee is the best to answer. Lee, would you like to deal with those?
Yeah, thanks, Commodore. First question I think is from Mark with regard to the what div starts at what line. Essentially, the start lines have been published online on the race website and on the notice board. So I think that will be clear for the 4 race start lines and who is actually on each of those lines. Second question there is from Jen. It's with regard to friends and family being allowed on the dock when we arrive. Just want to go back to the first part. First of all, when you arrive, do not leave the boat. Go through your process and ensure that your decoration has occurred. Once that's occurred, then family can meet a boat. Also, though, note that on New Year's Eve, it's been clearly stated that only 5 additional personnel may join a yacht at the dock on New Year's Eve, and that has to be stated early, and those places need to be declared.
I'll just pause for a moment to see if there's another question come in, Lee.
So obviously the race committee will consider that issue in terms of one of your crew PCR test results aren't in hand by the race start. That said, I would expect if not most, potentially almost all would actually be doing the testing here at the CYCA, and we expect all those results to come back within 24 hours. So I highly encourage you, if you have not already done your test, to do it here at the CYCA and take advantage of that 24-hour turnaround. Good question for John. Berthing can be tricky without somebody stepping on the dock to make a line fast. We might need to be a bit more mindful to give each other a chance. And absolutely, I mean, safety first. Obviously, we need to apply COVID, but if need be, of course, somebody's going to have to jump onto the dock to actually help with our lines, to make lines fast. Absolutely. Then return to the boat and then apply with the COVID protocols, but safety first all the way through. Sensible application.
Well, thanks very much, Lee. I see there's no further questions. So could I wish everybody a Merry Christmas to you and your friends, and all the very best to you as you go through your final preparations over the next 2 days. Please stay safe in this preparation as you plan to participate in one of the world's most iconic blue water yacht races. Looking forward to seeing you on the marina, and I'll close this briefing now. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we have one more question from Lindsay May. Lindsay's asked the question, do we give Rolex a big rap? Well, absolutely, Lindsay. Rolex is our major sponsor, and we always have great respect and appreciation for Rolex. There are also a whole host of other people who have made massive contributions to this race, and we would like to acknowledge those as well. Thank you. I'll close this briefing. Thanks.